There's some tears shed. And that's the way it goes. Tanya, you said journey. It is a journey, and I think allowing ourselves, if you want to say, giving each other permission to grieve and feel whatever we need to feel has been super critical to moving forward, because that's what we knew we had to do. I mentioned a minute ago, I hate the phrase moving on, because you don't move on from someone you love, but you do have a life, and you've got to move forward for you, for others, and even for the calling of God on your life.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today, we're joined by Clint Hatton. Clint, thanks for joining us today.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation quite a bit. You guys, even the picture on your logo, you just have these great smiles and just put off this great energy. So I'm thrilled to be with you.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you on, and we appreciate the quick turnaround as well. You made yourself available for us, and we had some scheduling. Challenges, and you were adaptable. So again, we appreciate that as well.
It's no problem. Usually right about now, I'm not doing anything else, so we're okay.
All right. Well, Clint, we're going to get started by learning a bit more about you. So I'm going to ask you the loaded question. Who is Clint Hatton?
Yeah, that totally is a loaded question. I probably would have answered it differently years ago too, but who is Clint Hatton? He's someone who I like to say is a deliriously happy husband. Being a husband is my number one priority. I'm a man of faith, so my number one thing is, of course, my faith in God. But I love being married. I love being the best husband that I can possibly be. My three boys, one who is heaven bound already, but the other two, they're an essential part of my life. So I really do my best to be just a great dad. I strongly value honesty and integrity and character in people. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it and I follow through. And, those are just a few of the key traits that I feel like, at the end of the day, if people talk about me, hopefully that's who they say I was.
Okay, perfect. And there's something I want to circle back to that you said there early on. You said this question would have been answered differently a few years ago. So who was Clint Hatton a few years ago?
Yeah, well, and I think, and a lot of your listeners, or actually a lot of your guests, probably answered it this way. So I don't mean to say they were wrong, but I think a lot of times when we get asked that question, we run off this laundry list of things that we do, not really who we are, or necessarily how we want to be known as a human being. At the end of the day, I want to be known for how I made people feel and any kind of an impact I had in their life. So, but, I would answer it before. I would have said, well, I was born and raised in Southern California, and then I eventually got into sales, and I was in that for many years, and I was a pastor for 17 years, and I did this and I did that. And, it would have been something like that.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, Clint, again, you mentioned probably the thing that is most important to you is, being a husband. So can we talk a bit about your family? And we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, my wife and I have been married almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in April. And so, we started out as best friends, or, well, I shouldn't say it that way, because that makes it sound like we hung out as best friends. We started out in a friendship. Can I say it that way? Yeah. And we have a pretty layered story there, Brent. That's a loaded question of itself. That would take up an entire episode. So I probably need to steer clear of some of our early story, but to put it succinctly, we developed a friendship very early on and went through some tough circumstances before we even had made a collective decision that we felt like we were supposed to move forward towards getting married. So our communication skills, I think, were really good from early on. Now, that's not to say we haven't had to work on it. You still got to continue to grow. And, certainly after 20 years, I know you guys can relate to this. At least you hope this to be true. You're not the same people, you grow, life throws some curveballs at you. And so you respond to those things. You think differently, you get older, you mature, all those different things. So I love our marriage. I love the friendship and everything that it represents. It's just been an amazing ride for us.
And as a dad, 18 and 14, right?
Almost, yeah. 18 and 13 right now. Yeah.
13.
Very
okay,
close.
Right. So you said, you're a man of integrity and honesty. And, we have one teenager in the house. And, just in parenting and raising our kids, like that's something that comes up a lot, right? As we're parenting and teaching, like you just want people, I always say, you want people when they hear your name or when they see your name to think a certain way, right? How have you helped to teach your boys integrity and honesty and those positive traits?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do think that's really important. There's a phrase that a lot of people have liked to use for years, that more is caught than taught. Now, I do think you can certainly have valuable conversations with your kids and give them the do's and the don'ts. But I do think the way you demonstrate it certainly means a lot more. So, one thing that's probably been an advantage in terms of, if I could use the term, even coaching with our kids, coaching our kids up, is that because we were pastors for so many years and we were always heavily involved in especially youth and young adult ministries of some form. So they were around us a lot. They saw us interacting with people a lot. Many times, obviously there was a level of confidentiality that we always had to have in our role. So they couldn't hear everything that was going on, but we could talk about circumstances and situations without names and stuff like that, and explain to them why we respond the way we do, and why, if somebody's saying something about us, for example, or against us, but we don't return it, we would be able to, walk them through the reason why that's important is because, it's always better to take the high road. It's, you don't never really need to defend yourself if you have walked in truth and you've done the right things. And, so I think just being able to observe us a lot, not just in our home, but in our roles, is one thing. And then I think, another really critical thing for parents, I just had to do this. I was like three days ago, maybe 4 days ago, is, sometimes we're wrong and sometimes we say the wrong things. And so, my oldest now, who is 18, there was a circumstance that happened, and I was pretty frustrated with him, based on a decision he had made. But in that moment, I allowed my anger to get the best of me. And I said it in a way that it's not my norm. It's not how I normally roll. And so that happened. It was kind of a late night conversation. So everybody just chilled out and went to bed. But, the next day I went up to him and we needed to talk about what had happened with what, the issue at hand, and deal with it. But I started with, before we get started, because he was wrong with what we were talking about, but I was wrong in how I initiated the conversation. So I said, first, I need to apologize. The way I spoke to you was not my character, my nature with you. It's not how I want to talk to you. I let, my anger, my frustration get the best of me. And, so I think a lot of times it's those simple things where we're willing to be vulnerable and we're willing to be, honest and wrong in front of our kids. That teaches them a form of integrity and character as well. So I think for me, those two things are probably some of the bigger things I can think of.
Okay.
And this is just kind of random and totally unrelated to anything that we're talking about right now, but
Okay.
it's going to bother me if I don't ask. You have the two guitars in the background. What's the significance? Are you a musician or are you just a big fan of music?
This is where the character integrity has to kick in. I could make up a really great story, but the truth is, I do not play them. But it is kind of a cool story. I'll duck. Let's see, which way do I need to go here? I'll duck out of the way a little bit. The red guitar, that's a Les Paul. And the short version on that is several years ago. It's probably been actually close to 10 years ago now. I was given a talk And at the end of it, it was in a church setting. So I stepped off the platform, and this guy, it just picture a Hell's Angel motorcycle guy. And he just was the full part, right? The way he was dressed, the whole 9 yards, long hair, just looked, rough looking guy, but he's weeping. And so I'm like, hey, what's going on? So the funny thing about this story is that already implies that I said something profound, right? And the truth was, he wasn't even coming to talk to me about what I had just talked about. But apparently he had been to a different talk I'd done a month or two before, and it just really impacted him in a very positive way. So he was very moved. And then he goes, there's something I need to do. I have to give you this. And then he turns around, he pulls out this big hard case. It's got all these cool roadie stickers on. I mean, really, even the case itself is really cool. And then he pulls out this guitar, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I tried for a little bit to talk him out of it, because I knew this thing was very valuable. I mean, this is a very valuable guitar. But, he was very convinced that it was something that God was asking him to do. And there was something in that transaction for him. So, in that spirit, I received it. So ultimately it's set. And then the cool story behind it, because I don't play. I don't think I said that part yet, but I don't play. But Gabriel, my oldest son, when he was about, I don't know, I would say he was probably about 15 or so, maybe 16. I'm actually in a room that we recreated of his son, and it's on the opposite side of where we sit in the living room. We're sitting in the living room one night, and all of a sudden we hear this. And I was just actually asking my wife right before I got on this, because neither of us can remember the riff, but it was a rock song, like a well-known one. That's why it's driving me nuts. I can't think of it. And we hear it clean, like really clear. And we didn't even know he had ever even tried to play a guitar. And I looked at her, I'm like, did you hear that? And she's like, I did. That sounded live. I think it was, so we came back to his room, and sure enough, man, he's sitting here with the guitar, and he's playing a really clean, it was like Leonard Skinner or something, and we're like, when did you learn to play guitar? And of course you should, as parents of the ages that we're in today, you should know the answer. YouTube. He goes, yeah, I've just been watching some YouTube videos. I'm like, what? So anyway, and the other one was a guitar given to him by one of the worship leaders of a church that we used to be a part of, that just appreciated him and his giftings.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, I'm really glad I asked that question.
Yeah, it is a good story. It'd be funner for me if I could say, well, actually, I'm a former rock star as well. I just didn't want to brag when he asked me who I am, but I used to travel with not so much.
Well, yeah. Well, it's interesting too that it was Gabriel's answer. So can we talk about Gabriel a bit and just learn more about him?
Yeah. Well, Gabriel was. We all love all of our kids, right? If you have more than one child, you love them all. But we also recognize they're all different. They all have their own characteristics, and so
Absolutely.
he was one that was very very intelligent, but not just intelligent, because all our boys have had a form of intelligence. They've all done well in school and stuff, but he had really high communication skills at a really early age. I'm talking like 4, 5, 6 years old, which was really cool. At times we're like, that's my boy. And then other times it's like, you're talking to me like you're 15 and you think you know everything already. This is too soon, So he had both sides of that, but he was fiery, early on. He could have, like, if he was going to have a fit as a kid, he went for, like, if the scale of 1 to 10, he'd go for like a 20. He could be really just, crazy tantrums. That obviously went away as he started to get a little bit older, but just really passionate about whatever he wanted to do, whatever it was, didn't make any difference. If he decided he was going to do it, it was a done deal, just like the guitar thing. He also, I don't know if you can see that photo in the background there, but he also taught himself photography. Later on, did get some training with some professionals too, but just an amazing photographer. And so that's how he was. And so one of the things that happened was when he was 8, he went up in a small aircraft with his uncle Danny. And it was like, I describe it's like, for me, I have to have my coffee in the morning. It's like, I actually, when I was 19s to mid 20s, I actually fought some pretty bad drug abuse. I actually did meth for 9 years along with some other stuff. And I walked away from all that. I just quit cold turkey, but it's like coffee's my new meth. I mean, it's something where if I take it, it's like, it just gets me jazzed up. And that's how it was for him. One time, that's all it took. And he's like, I'm going to be a pilot, but he's 8. So we're like, okay, sure. Right. And you're going to, right. And you're going to want to, be a Major League Baseball player next week. And, a CEO or a lawyer was really high on our list because of his personality. Because we figured he would have to be in charge because he didn't like really following anybody else's rules. And, it was just a matter of time. Plus, he loved arguing, and facts didn't necessarily get in the way, as long as he had a point to make. So, but he had that kind of personality, and he decided he was going to do it. And that was it. And he held on to it. And then by the time he got into high school, when he was 14, we had 2 really cool opportunities open up that were pretty unique. And, as I've expressed, we're people of faith, and there was a lot of what we felt like was really the favor of God to even make this stuff happen, because at that point of our life, we were pastors, and not too many people get into that because of the, 6 to 7, 8-figure income. Right. So we had no means really to help him be able to fly at that stage, because, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, but, if your listeners who are maybe familiar with aviation would know, most people spend 10, 15 grand or more just to be able to get a license by the time you get the instruction and all that kind of stuff. So he joined a club. There was a club at the local airport, like 7 minutes from our house. And it was founded by a guy, his name is Kevin Lacey, which is kind of a fun side story too, because some of your listeners may actually know who he is. You may even know who he is. He actually was the star of a show called Airplane Repo that was on Discovery Channel. And it's exactly what it sounds like. He professionally went and repoed every kind of aircraft you can possibly think of. I'm talking about Alaska, the ones that, with the I always forget, the seaplanes, from that to a little Cessna to a Lear jet. I mean, and everything in between. So wow. He's a great guy. He's a character, but he started this club because he had to work really hard for everything. And he just it was only for teenagers, and he wanted teenagers that had interest in the aviation industry to be able to pursue that. And so his freshman year, he joined that. And then on top of that, our local high school here has a 4-year aviation program, educational program, which is not typical either. There's not many here in the United States for sure. So he was on his way, and chasing his dream, which is what he did. So I don't know if you want to go into that next part of the story yet, or if you want to, catch anything else about that, but okay.
Yeah, no, let's go there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We'll go there. So again, I want to reiterate, he's living his dream, and everything's fallen together. This club, he got $1,000 scholarship through American Airlines that he earned on his own. And because of the way his mentor, Kevin, structured this club, the kids only paid $50 a year to be a part of this club. And Kevin supplied the flight instructors at no cost.
Wow.
And he only had to pay for fuel, and even that at a wholesale discount. And so again, it was just, everything was just unfolding. And what the kids do pay is they pay in sweat equity. So, from 14 to 16, because they won't let you get in the cockpit until you're at least 16. He had to just work his tail off. They did oil changes. They worked on parts. They painted planes. They did pretty much everything you can think of in terms of maintenance and that type of thing. And so then at 16, he got the opportunity to start flying. And so when that happened, of course, it only took one time up with an instructor, and it was definitely a done deal. So that goes on for a period of time. And then he actually soloed at 16 years old before he even had his driver's license here in Texas to drive a car. So, which was, if you can imagine that, a little strange, not ordinary. So he did that, and he's on his way. So at 17, he got his private pilot's license. He actually studied for the exam. You can't get it until you're 17. He studied for the exam, passed it with flying colors the first time, which is also not necessarily typical. And then his check ride and everything he had to do with flying with an instructor went just perfect. And so, boom, he achieved his first dream of being a pilot. Now, he had greater dreams of flying different types of planes and, moving on that career, but it didn't change the fact that he was truly living his dream. And then several months later, anybody that's involved in aviation would tell you that, when you're a young pilot, and I'm not talking about age, I'm just talking about new, it's all about the hours. So you're looking for every opportunity in the world to just get in the plane and keep flying. And so that's what he was doing. And on September 23rd of 2019, he had taken a friend to Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, to be specific, which is, several hours north of us, and dropped her off safely. And then on his return trip, he only got about 20 minutes outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, and he was going through a fairly not mountainous like Colorado, but fairly mountainous region in that particular part of Arkansas. And a unexpected weather system came through, and it caused him, the NTSB, who does the investigations in all plane crashes in the United States, determined that he suffered from spatial disorientation. So what that is a lot of listeners will be familiar with it, even if they don't know the term. Kobe Bryant, the famous basketball player, in the helicopter crash, that's exactly what happened with his pilot. And his pilot had a multi-million-dollar aircraft with, all the navigational tools and stuff like that. Gabriel was just in a little Cessna. And so he lost his horizon, and he flew into the mountain, and he lost his life. And so, our world turned upside down and changed forever, quite literally in an instant. And it was a really, and is a very difficult thing for our family. We, as you can imagine, we miss him daily, hourly. And as much as a hit that was, there were some things that we knew coming out of that we would have to do, that maybe we'll talk about some of that, just to honor the way he lived his life. And so that's the journey we began on the morning after September 23rd.
Wow. And I mean, that's heavy stuff. There's just so much that comes, and obviously I'm not speaking from experience, but like just loss in general, right? Like grief when it comes, and many of us can imagine losing a child. So 2019, back then in September to now, we know that grief never goes away.
Right.
It's there. It just is dealt with differently as maybe time goes on and stuff like that, right? So for you and your wife and your two boys, what has this journey looked like for the four of you, and then also as a couple, just dealing with the loss of your son?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Tanya, I want to say you framed that really well, because a lot of times people, and I think it comes out of a good place, but they'll say things like, how did you move on? Or, when did you stop grieving and stuff like that? And you framed it really, really well, because the truth is, the loss, the pain is never going to go away,
right?
Nor is it even a goal. It's not, for me and our whole family feels that way. Not feeling the pain and the sting of his loss is never been a goal, because it represents the great love we shared. And so,
Right.
that part is okay, but we did have to make some decisions in how we were going to grieve, especially as a family unit, and so that happened really early on. And the way I like to say that, because, I want to be really sensitive as I answer this question, because it's how we rolled with the situation and some of the principles that we've lived by, that I know not necessarily everybody else would have or does. And that doesn't make us right or anybody else wrong. So I want to make sure and frame it that way right away. But I will also say that, being a pastor for 17 years, and especially the type of pastoral role I had, which was heavily involved with coaching and mentoring people, really involved in their lives, walking a lot of people through a lot of very difficult situations, including death, and including in some cases the death of the child, and or others that are really close. And so I do feel like I had the advantage in the sense that I had seen patterns of what could end up causing our marriage to completely implode, because unfortunately that happens more often than we'd all like it to, with the death of a child. And then the family itself, just the family unit itself, being able to move forward in some sort of a healthy way. It doesn't always happen. And so, it was a long night. We don't need to get into that because this could literally be a 2-hour story. It was a long night, ebbs and flows. We find out at 8:15 p.m. There was a lot that happened through the night. We knew he went down. We didn't know what had happened, and really didn't even get the final word until 3:30 a.m. During that night, we did not put our boys through that hell. Our other two sons, his brothers, they were in bed. They didn't even know what was going on. So the next morning when they came out is when we had to start. And so what happened was I sat with them and my bride Amárillys, and I said, all right, listen, we have two ways, two responses, two choices, if you will, of how we're going to respond to this. One is we can identify with the pain. We can focus on the tragedy. We can focus on that it was a plane crash. We could focus on, what if he wouldn't have left that night, or what if he had chosen some other career, or, all these different things. And if we allow that to be our focal point, then we are not going to live the type of life that we were meant to live. We're going to be shadows of ourselves because our pain's going to trap us. And so I said, here's the second choice. We can choose life. And what that meant specifically was I said, you've already heard me describe how Gabriel lived. I didn't have to explain that to them, of course. So I said, your brother attacked life. He was chasing and living his dream. And frankly, as much as I wish I'd have lived to 100, and, that's when I'd have been the one to ride off into the sunset and seen him grow and get married and do all those things. In many ways, he lived more in a little less than 18 years than a lot of people do in a lifetime, that never chase their dreams, that never go for it. And so I just told the boys, we are going to live like he lived, whatever that looks like for each of us, because we each have different passions and stuff. And so that was part one, was we're going to focus on how he lived and honor his life, not be stuck in the tragedy of how he died. The second piece was the grieving process itself. And so, that's something that, I had no advantage there. There was no advantage for the pain that we were experiencing. And there was no advantage in terms of what it was going to look like for me or Amárillys or Joel or Liam. And so we just made a pact. I said, boys, we don't know what's going to look like from time to time. We don't know. There's going to be days where maybe we're very sad and we want to cry. And there's other days where maybe we're pissed off and angry. And, we don't, as a family, we don't allow patterns of cussing and stuff like that. It's not how we talk. But, I even said, if you even are so angry, you need to cuss. You need to know that whatever emotion you're feeling while we're grieving is okay. Mm-hmm. And we're going to work through it. We're not going to try and push it down. We're not going to try to ignore it. And I think what was really critical with that, and I've discovered that even more so, I think, because now we're a little over 3.5 years down the road, not to mention because of our story, I've had opportunity to talk to and help a lot of people that have went through something similar. And I think, just being the dad, as dads, we want to be the leaders of our home, and we want to lead our family well. And especially, when the moment hits where they really need us to stand up, we want to be able to do that. But had I chosen to do that by telling them, you need to, share your emotions with me, but if I'm feeling anything, and I wouldn't, people don't say this, but a lot of men will just hide it. Like go in a back room if they're going to feel sad or if they're going to cry or whatever, and never let anybody see that they actually have to go through emotions too, and just try to play the tough guy. And I told them, I said, we're not going to do that. And so that's what happened and has happened. we allowed each other, and still do to this day, we allow each other the space to feel whatever it is we're feeling. My youngest, Liam, 13 now, just actually it was in the last week, and this doesn't happen all the time, but we put him to bed, and he's an athlete. So he's supposed to get up at like 6:30 in the morning. And so he comes out, and I'm like, oh gosh, well, that typical thing. Like, what is it? You have a bottle of water. You already have, what is this? And he said, I was just thinking about Gabriel, and he started to process, and he was starting to get emotional. So we sat down, and we let him talk it through, and there's some tears shed. And that's the way it goes. Tanya, you said journey. It is a journey, and I think allowing ourselves, if you want to say, giving each other permission to grieve and feel whatever we need to feel has been super critical to moving forward, because that's what we knew we had to do. I mentioned a minute ago, I hate the phrase moving on, because you don't move on from someone you love, but you do have a life, and you've got to move forward for you, for others, and even for the calling of God on your life.
So I know you said, dealing with this as a family unit, and I have seen, statistics for the marriage piece, and how marriages can sometimes fall apart after losing a child.
Yeah.
So how has that been for you and your wife?
Yeah, well, that's been a journey in and of itself too. I mentioned a little bit ago that we had a pretty solid foundation of communication from pretty early on, even before we got married. So, I think we've always, first of all, valued communication, as a married couple, and we've helped a lot of crisis marriages over the years. That was also a big part of what we've done. I think you have to really value growing in communication with your spouse. And that's something that we have. So the foundation was there. I don't know if what I'm about to tell you would have been the same if we had a really, poor method of communication and didn't really work things out very well. I'm sure it would have felt impossible. But we had that foundation. And so really it just became about what I now call courageous conversations. And what that simply means is especially when you start talking about grieving is a very strange thing, because you experience so many different, not just emotions, but even, there are times when mentally you just are foggy and you don't necessarily know that's why, concentrating on certain things, especially the first couple of years as we were kind of learning the rhythm. And I actually call the first year the shock and awe phase. And the reason why I call it that is that first year you haven't experienced all the birthdays, the milestones, all those things that are a really in your face reminder that this beautiful human being that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with is no longer here, And so going through that, we would just periodically ask each other, especially when it wasn't obvious. And what I mean by that is, if one of us is crying or one of us is angry, it's kind of easy to say, I can see you're upset, and you can ask, how are you doing? But we got to where we would periodically, when things are just calm, nothing necessarily going on, we love to spend time on the couch at night once everybody's, once everybody's to bed. That's kind of our time. And so I would ask her, or she would ask me, hey, how are you doing with Gabriel? How's it going? What are you feeling? And, sometimes it would be, I'm okay. And then other times it may be immediate, or maybe I ask her the question and tears would just begin to well up and stream. And she would have to talk about how she really was struggling that day. And, the variety of things that go through your mind, and, and sometimes, the question why, or, just the things that go along with suffering through a tragedy. So to me, Tanya, there's probably more to it than that, but having the courage to ask those questions is huge. And the reason why I say that specifically is because most of the time we're talking about within a marriage, we already know this to be true with a lot of the people that were our friends during these last few years too, because some have hardly ever heard from again.
Right.
And then others, you can tell they're kind of dancing around not knowing what to say, you know? And so most of the time people won't ask a courageous question because they're afraid of the answer.
Right.
And they're afraid. And in this case, with dealing with the tragedy in a marriage, you know, people may think, well, I don't want to ask my wife because if she's not feeling anything, maybe I'm going to send her down a spiral. Or if she is feeling something really deep, but I'm feeling pretty good, is that going to take me down? And, you know, I get it. I understand that fear, but it's much healthier and a much better process if you're willing to just have those, you know, tough questions and deal with the reality of what's actually going on. And so I think that's been pretty key.
Okay. And I just kind of want to set the context for, you know, maybe when there is a difficulty having those courageous conversations. Now, just speaking from maybe some research that you've done or just what you've experienced, you know, in a pastoral role. Yeah. I guess what are some of the things that you see when, you know, you see a couple that's dealing with this kind of grief, that, you know, the things that contribute to them eventually, you know, leading to divorce or having challenges in their marriage? Obviously the communication is a key piece or lack thereof, but what are some of the other things that you've seen or observed?
Well, I think what happens when you bury, this is true within the marriage context of the question you asked. And this is also true with just about any individual who tries to bury any kind of trauma. And that is, we know there's an enormous amount of data that when you suppress your emotions, there are spiritual, physiological, and mental issues that come out of that. There are consequences to that. And you may think because you're able to handle the moment in a way that you feel stronger somehow, that long-term that can't hold out. And so what I've found with marriages in particular, when they're not willing to have these tough conversations and to feel and to cry, or to, you know, even if it's an argument or be, you know, angry with each other, it's okay to be angry with your spouse, right? I mean, it's okay. Now, the way in which you do that matters, but you can be, angry. And so, you know, I think what ends up happening is when you suppress everything and you're not willing to just be true to how you're feeling and even what you're thinking about the other person and how they're responding, because maybe it's responding a little bit differently than you are. You know, if you're talking about grief, they may be grieving very differently. Then you can tend to get really bitter, resentful. You can begin to imagine in your mind all kinds of false narratives about the motives of that other person, including your spouse. And actually, if I could, you know, it just made me think of this. This wasn't specifically with Amárillys and I, but I think it speaks to this point, because we had to also coach and teach Joel and Liam how to allow each other, how to communicate with each other regarding Gabriel's passing. And so in real simple terms, Joel is the one who was only 3 years younger. Shortly before Gabriel passed away, earlier in their brotherhood, they were like, you know, pounding each other. And, you know, you could make a case that Gabriel bullied Joel at times, you know, when they were a little bit younger. But prior to this, they had went on a vacation with grandparents, spent a lot of time together, and just their relationship went over that hump, and they became really good friends too, not just brothers. So losing his brother going into his freshman year of high school was truly devastating. And not that it wasn't for Liam, but Liam was only 9. There was a much larger gap, a very different relationship, which is something you also have to keep in mind. That's why there is no one size fit all with any of this stuff, because, you know, individuals are different and relationships are different. So what would happen is Liam loved to bring Gabriel into the here and now. That's how he grieved. So example, we may be out at our favorite pizza joint and we're starting to enjoy the pizza, and Liam would say something like, "Oh man, Gabriel would have loved this pizza," you know, or we're watching a show or doing something, and he'd go, "Man, Gabriel would have loved." That's how he did it. Well, those first couple of months, Joel did not like that, because he was one that really wanted to try and bury things a little bit more. And so he would get angry. He would get mad about it. And so what we'd have to do is we would do this all in the open. This is always in the open. Now, with exception of there may be times where it was appropriate to take one or the other boy to their own room,
Right.
just so it's private moment for them. But anyway, what we ended up telling Joel was, Joel, this is how he grieves. He's not doing anything wrong, and he's not hurting you, nor is he trying to hurt you. This is just how he expresses it. Whereas for Joel, he was much more, he did talk to us, and we did ask him a lot of questions too. That was our ongoing thing, but he just tended to be a little bit more introspective. So it took him a while before he could get used to that. And so I think, with your marriage dynamic, that's why it's so important to have these conversations and to be honest about what you're actually feeling and why you're feeling the way you are. And where's your imagination taking you, because there can be some pretty scary moments with the grieving process that want to try and take you to a dark place. And so if you're not honest about that and you become isolated, then you're setting yourself up for some rough roads.
I think it's just what you've shared. I mean, there will be parents listening that haven't lost a child yet, but at this age that many of us are at, there's going to be loss in some way, shape, or form, right? So just to keep that in mind too, that this isn't for just this specific situation. It is good for all of us to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to make the point too, because I don't think I've said this yet. We are not perfect. I'm not a perfect husband. We're not perfect a couple. We're not perfect parents. What I said as far as our foundation and how we started the grieving process, I call it our compass. We that's true, and we have stayed true to that. But we've had to recalibrate to it many times because we haven't done it perfectly. I don't think any human is going to do it perfectly.
No.
And we have had some tough moments where we weren't communicating well. We have had some tough moments where maybe we let it go, 3, 4, 5 days, maybe even a week. I don't think we've ever gone past that because and here's the other thing, when you develop this pattern of constant intimate communication, your ability to discern what it might be going on in your significant other raises pretty high. You're able to pick up on stuff a lot quicker. So, but we haven't done it perfectly. It's not about perfection, but it is about recalibrating back to living by your values, and those will guide you.
Now, and I don't want to ask this question, and I want to make sure I phrase this properly. I don't want to be insensitive here, but as a father, was there, and I'm asking this more for those who are listening, because I'm sure there's, again, just based on what we're talking about, there's going to be people who are listening who are dealing with a similar set of circumstances. Was there anything that you had to wrestle with as a father to, I guess, avoid having feelings of regret, or, was there points where you maybe took on a little bit of ownership for, the way things unfolded?
Yeah, no. And actually, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. Thank you. Again, I call that a courageous question as well, because you don't know, you don't know how that's going to land. Right. But no, that's very fair. There's a few things with that. I think in the beginning stages of dealing with the tragedy, you're really just trying to get through every day. Truly. Especially, we did the celebration service a week later, different things that, that's the crazy thing about tragedy is, it happened on a Monday night, and then Tuesday morning we're dealing with this tragedy, and yet it's still Tuesday morning. It's still a work day. It's still a school day. It's still, life. So, but with that, I think I have approached what happened with Gabriel, what I consider to be, let's make sure we're not becoming revisionists of how we got here. And here's what I mean by that. I shared a little bit early on that we felt it was completely God's favor for him to ever even get in a plane and to be able to earn his license. And I only gave you little bits and pieces. There are other components of what was going on in our life around that time and around his dream that came together. that we 100% knew that only God made the way for him to be able to do that, right? So then for us to turn around and have guilt ourselves as far as the accident, as far as him losing his life flying, that would be revisionist, because now you're changing the history of how things happened and how they came about. And now you're saying, well, I'm going to change the narrative and say, well, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe it was my fault. I did not go there. I don't go there. Now, that said, that's a little bit different than did I have any personal regrets of just our relationship and that it's now over? Was there anything left that I wish I would have said, and I don't regret, but I definitely, well, I can tell you what it's done. With our boys, no one leaves the house, even if you're going to the mailbox and coming back just about without saying, okay, I love you. Things that simple, I wish I'd have told him I loved him more. When he left that day, it was again, it was just a normal Monday, and he was leaving to fly, and he's headed out the door, out to the garage to go to his car. And I just heard him say, all right, see you later, Dad. And I said, okay, be careful. And that was it. I wish we had that pattern of just saying, hey, I love you, every single time. Because for a little while, that one stuck a little bit, that it was just such a seemingly meaningless interaction, as he left, just too common, and I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but it's just, that's how I felt. It's like now we, and the boys do it too. We don't even really have to be the first one to say it. We just make sure that we tell each other that we love each other. And then, Brennan, that's a great question too, because, things happen after your loved one passes away, and you even learn some things about them through other people that you didn't necessarily know. And one of those things that I learned about him was a major source of frustration that I had when he was alive. And what that simply was, is I already told you, that he was, go make it happen and Mr. Adventure and all that. One simple example would be, I remember one year we spent quite a bit of money to go rent a house on the Florida coast for a week. Had an amazing family vacation, just loved it. And then we had a 12-hour drive back, and we're not even an hour or two into it. And he's like, so where are we going now? Where are we going next? And for me, during that season, I thought, you ungrateful bird, can't you just enjoy, and I remember thinking that on more than one occasion. And what I really began to discover, especially as I began to hear stories of different people whose lives he had a real major impact in, and just the way he approached situations in life. He had one friend that was super depressed, didn't want to get off her couch. So he says, I'll be there in a minute, and drives over to her house, grabs her, pulls her off the couch and says, get in the car. We're going to look at puppies. And so they go and they look for puppies. Sounds like nothing, but all of his friends would say he just would never let anybody be down, And so what I realized was I did regret that I judged him in that way, and that he may have had an ungrateful moment because he was a teenager. But for the most part, it wasn't really him being ungrateful. It's just he was adventurous and he was courageous. And what it did was it revealed in me, and it's actually partly why I ended up writing the book. It revealed some cowardice in myself, in my own life, that there were certain adventures or things that I had talked about wanting to do that I had made all the excuses in the world, gave into fear, whatever you want to call it, that I didn't do. And so, even that, the way he lived, exposed, and men don't like to be called cowards. Those are fighting words, right?
Right.
So, but that's what I called myself, is like, I was a coward. And so he taught me. So, to your question, it wasn't so much that I fought with, again, what circumstances would have been different. He was living his dream. It's that simple. He was living his dream. And I've had people ask me, well, with him doing that, risking his life, did you ever feel like you were worried or whatever? It's like, did I ever feel fear? Yeah, absolutely. But at what cost? Am I going to kill his dream because I can't work through my own fear.
Mm.
And that's what got us there. I mean, I remember the day when he soloed for the first time, guys, we were both there. My wife and I were filming it. And I remember he goes up. I got video of this actually. And he goes up and you're like, I know you guys just got back from a basketball game tonight. So, you're cheering. You're like, yes, awesome. And he's going up. We're so proud until he starts circling. Then the next thought that hit my brain was, uh-oh. He's got to come back down and land this thing, yeah. And so fear, would try to creep in. And so we had to crush that so that he could live his dream. And so in the same way, we can't allow his death, even the way it happened in a tragic way, to now crush us in some way by changing the circumstances of what was really going on, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Man, that is so big. As parents, that fear, it comes up all the time. Like you could be parenting a newborn right now. You could be parenting a 5-year-old or a teenager. It's there, right? And it's so true what you said. Like we can't let the fear take over where we almost then like smother our child from being able to live their dream or to try something new or, and it's hard. It's definitely hard. And obviously they get older and like the driving, like you're talking about flying a plane. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what I'm going to do when it comes time to drive a car.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, that's big. Just dealing with that fear.
And we all go through it. And we all have to face it, in some form or fashion. But I think another thing that's been, a beautiful part of this experience, because, we're all familiar, believers are familiar with the scripture, beauty for ashes. And, I think sometimes that's interpreted that, or that, God is good. And, so he meant good in this. Listen, there's nothing good about tragedy. There's nothing good about some of the things that you may face as a couple, as a family. The goodness of God is way bigger than that, right? It goes beyond the bounds of the situation itself. And so one of the good things that has come out of that is for Amárillys and I both. I mentioned earlier, I called myself a coward. Well, that stopped. We looked under every rock of our life in the year or two after this happened. And we looked at the relationships that we have, who we spend our time with. We looked at, at that time we were still pastoring. We just laid that down in January. Now, the reason why we did, we're not, we're still believers and we're still very involved in a church. But part of the reason why we did that was for a very long period of time. We had a couple of other things on our heart. For me, one of them was personal development coaching. I'd wanted to write a book for a very long time, just had never had the right motivation, to do it. She's an artist. She's an amazing artist. And so we moved into this new chapter of our life where we are now the ones living like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave, and taking risks and chasing our dreams and going after it. And so the byproduct of that and the beautiful side of that is Joel and Liam, who are now following in his coattails and ours, have not only seen it in their brother, but now they're seeing that in us as well. And I think that's really important as a parent. If you just think about this, how many times would we say something like to our kids, hey, you can be anything, you can do anything you want to do. If it's on your heart, you need to go for it. Meanwhile, if they knew that there was a dream that we refused to chase after, what would we do if they just turned it around and said, okay, great, but why haven't you gone for it?
Mm-hmm.
And so now we can say that. That we're chasing our dreams. We're moving forward. We're growing. We're challenging ourselves. We're challenging our marriage. Tanya, you asked a while back, so this is kind of a long loop back to the communication between the two of us. But here's reality too. It changed us. This event changes you. That's not a negative or a positive. It's going to change you. Now, how you respond to it is going to dictate whether or not it's ultimately positive or negative, but it changes. And so, and even in the last few years, it changed the dynamics of what we're doing. It changed the dynamics of which we make decisions. And so, my Amárillys has grown in certain areas dramatically. And this is going to sound so corny, but one simple example is I used to do a lot of things for her. And I don't mean like controlling. I mean, she like if we were going to go out and buy a piece of IKEA furniture, which if anybody's ever done that, and then you open the owner's manual, you'll know we don't know who created that owner's manual, but it doesn't help you at all with this thing, right? So we would do a lot of that stuff together, or I would do maintenance on something, right? And she'd wait for it to get done until I had time to do it. Just simple things like that.
Yeah.
It's really changed her to the fact where she is bold. And I'm not trying to play on terms of big, bold, brave, but she's so much bolder now. She really is. And so there's one day she went to IKEA. I'm not making that one up. Comes back with like this big table. I'm like, oh, do you want help with that? And she's like, nope. And she just starts going for it. Well, she's very handy. But why I'm bringing that up is for a little while, that was almost offensive to me. It hurt me because I thought, oh, wait, what? You don't need me anymore?
Right.
And so I had to battle through that for a little bit and different things for me too, where I'm growing in areas that she wasn't necessarily used to me growing in either. And so we've had to be able to give permission. And I think this is so huge. You have to give each other permission to grow into a higher level of themselves, right? A new level of their maturity and of their giftings and those types of things. So those have all, been new experiences and good ones. Not always easy, but worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, again, I've got to lay the proper context for this question as well.
Okay. All right.
But, we talk about, well, first I'm going to just steal a bit of a Steve Jobs quote here. There's a quote that I always refer back to where he says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backward. And, and you've talked a lot about how this experience has caused you to grow and has caused your family to grow out of necessity, really, to be able to move forward. Now, question I'm going to ask is about your faith, because I'm just thinking now, trying to put myself in your shoes, and you talk about God's favor working to make all of these things happen for Gabriel. Was there ever a point, even if it's just for a second, and if you don't feel comfortable answering this question, I'll edit this part out. But was there ever a point where you thought, like, God, why did you make all of this happen for this to be the end result?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, it would be very dishonest to say that never occurred. And it hits in different ways at different times. I'm staying true to my answer from before, not being a revisionist, that, recalibrated pretty quickly, but absolutely, it makes you wonder, because, this isn't the only thing we've gone through in our lifetime. We went through a miscarriage. Gabriel was born very prematurely at 3 pounds, 12 ounces. When Joel was born, he was born full term, but she wasn't coming out of the anesthesia. And we had a very scary night, and then Liam was born 3 months early at 1 pound, 14 ounces.
Wow.
And that's not even the full list yet. So, we've had, some tough things where God showed himself faithful as you walked out that particular challenge or difficulty, right? So we had that to recalibrate to, but death is a whole other animal. It's a whole other level. And so I would say for me, the question why was solved pretty quickly, but I'm going to share something really quickly outside of what you asked that I think is related, even though it's not the exact question you asked. But the why question for me, I solved a long time ago. And this is just my simple way of dealing with that. I asked myself the question, okay, if I ask God, why did this happen to us? Why did Gabriel have to die this way? What answer could he give me that would suffice? That in the state that I'm in, being this side of eternity and he's on the other and he's never coming back to this side, what answer would I go, oh, okay, that's all right. There isn't one. There isn't one. There is no answer. I want him back tomorrow. Okay. If God ever did answer, I'd say, okay, well, you're omnipotent. You created the universe. There may have been another way, right? for me, it's a bad question, because when you're talking about losing someone, there isn't going to be an answer that solves it for you. There just isn't, and I've made peace with that. Now, that said, I do believe we have an enemy of our soul.
Yep.
And I do believe there was definitely one attempt in particular to take me out. And it happened. If you don't mind me sharing that story, it'll take me a minute or two, but
Of course.
it's, so in short, this is only a few weeks after Gabriel had passed, what I'm about to share with you. One of the challenges of having someone pass away in a plane crash is the NTSB takes over everything. So you can't even get the body back. They've got to do the autopsies. They've got to check for drugs and alcohol. They got to check for, was there any kind of a birth defect, that somehow it was something biological that happened? I mean, you lose control of the body, right? And so all we knew was, and I don't mean to be graphic with your listeners, but I mean, it was a small plane crash. Our only option was cremation. So we knew that they were going to be sending his remains at some point. So time goes on, you're busy with other things. And then one day the doorbell rings, and I go to the door, and we have a dog that goes totally nuts every time the doorbell rings. And so I'm looking out the security window that we have on the side of our door, and it's the FedEx guy. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. Kick my dog back out of the, I didn't kick. Nobody with PETA, don't get mad at me. I didn't really kick her. Can we delete that part out? Yeah, I didn't kick her. I don't kick my dog. I just nudged her gently out of the way. She's a pit bull, so you got to use a little force. But I pushed her out of the way, and I just stepped on the doorstep. And so I look at the guy, and he's like, he's got that little device, that you sign, and he's got the uniform and all that. And so right before I went to reach for the device, I look at the box he's holding, and it had a biohazard sticker on it. And it had in big, bold red letters, cremated remains.
Wow.
And I was stunned. And I just remember thinking, do you have any clue what you're asking me sign for? And I honestly don't think the person did. I think they probably didn't even look at the package. So I signed for it. And I went inside, and Amárillys and I worked from home. So she was there, and I go into the kitchen. She's like, oh, what did we get? And so we opened the package, and we pulled out the box, and we wept really hard. I don't remember talking. I just remember holding each other for a while, and we just wept. And so, however long that went, Amárillys just kind of, we kind of let go of each other, and she went into our bedroom, and presumably, I don't even know if we talked about what she went to do, probably just to go check her face or whatever. And so the reason why I'm sharing this now is this was, to this date, still my darkest moment, and where I really feel like things could have went a completely different direction very quickly. And so she leaves. I'm standing there, and I'm looking at the box, and I literally, guys, physically felt this dark cloud blanket, whatever you want to call it. I felt heaviness coming on me. I felt anger. I felt despair. I felt depression. I felt like I'm going down, and I don't even care, for a moment. And what ended up happening is I feel like God spoke to me in just the right moment. I seriously felt, and I think I wrote about this story in the book. I think I said it was just, I had what I felt like was about 10 seconds of a lucid thought to stop it. And I mumbled it at first. I began to express gratitude. I literally just began to thank God, and I'm serious. It was just mumbling at first. And the more I thanked him, I began to thank him for the opportunity to be Gabriel's father. I began to thank him for the opportunity to have some of the experiences that we had. I began to thank him that he was able to live his dream, even if it was only for a short period of time. I just became grateful. And then as I did that, I also put my hands in the air, which for me is a posture of worship. And as I did that, no exaggeration, as fast as that cloud and that darkness had descended on me, it just lifted off me completely. And I think it's really important to say, I'm not talking about the pain. The pain did not lift.
Mm-hmm.
I was still in a lot of pain. But the enemy of my soul who wanted to take me out lost that day because of the power of gratitude. And so, it's a pretty vivid story. And it's a story that I remind myself of often in those moments where sometimes, thoughts will come into your head, and that's how I defeat them. I use gratefulness, about the power of gratitude.
No, and thank you for sharing all of that. There is one thing that I've been thinking since you kind of told the story of Gabriel's last day on this side of eternity, and again, thinking of how your family's been processing all of this, and Gabriel's friends. One person kind of stuck out to me, and that's the person that he actually dropped off in.
Yeah.
How was it? How was your family's interaction with them, and just making sure as well that they didn't feel responsible, because again, that would be putting myself in that person's shoes.
Yeah,
it'd be a horrible feeling too.
Yeah, well, you're dead on. So the morning after the crash, this was after our conversation and all that. And boy, guys, there's so many layers to even that particular day with the question you just asked, because there's a whole thing involving the NBC wanting to do an interview and coming over. And there was a lot that happened in that first 24 hours. But later that afternoon, we got word that her name is Avery, that she was really suffering, and that her mother and her both were blaming themselves. Her mom had actually asked Gabriel if he could take her home that weekend, because of all things, she was actually here for a funeral. And by him flying her back to Arkansas, it allowed her to not have to miss any classes. So it was a request that she had made. Now, again, it was all about hours, so there was no problem with asking that. So what ended up happening was we recognized in that moment that we had, even though we were, a complete train wreck in our own right. And I like to say it this way, it didn't matter in that moment that we hurt more. It just mattered that they hurt too. And so Amaryllis already had their phone numbers from previous. So she started texting them, and they were in our house about an hour later. And so we sat there, or stood there more so. And, we shared a lot of tears, a lot of hugs, and we prayed over them. And specifically, we prayed that, I think to your point, she was probably suffering from survivor syndrome, all that things already, and not wanting to go back to school, feeling just, the frailty of life, all that kind of stuff. What's the point? Why even do anything, And so we prayed over them both and talked to them both, and just encouraged her that, the same decision that we had made that morning, she needed to make for her own life. And again, that was the only way that she could really honor her friendship with Gabriel would be to attack life the way he did. And so that was a very poignant moment. It was raw and real, but at the end of the day, I think it helped her quite a bit. We've stayed in contact, of course. Actually, just in December, she brought us Christmas cookies because she was in town. She actually goes to a school in Utah now, but that was a thing, and it extended beyond her too. Even the club that night, that he was a part of, there was, probably 20 other students and some of their families that were out at the hangar grieving that night. And we had gotten word that they were actually talking about shutting it down. And part of that was because there was another tragedy that happened out that airport in the last couple of years. And so this was like the second thing. And Gabriel was, he was my son, but he really was, everybody would tell you, he was kind of bigger than life, definitely one of the leaders. And so it was a huge hit. And so that same scene played out, there too. We found ourselves out at that hangar, less than 24 hours after he left it. And same scene, just a lot of neck hugging and a lot of tears, but words of encouragement and prayers, and just, encouraging them that, again, you guys, if you have a passion for aviation, then if you want to show Gabriel how much you loved him, go for it.
Yeah.
Keep going for it, and they did. And we still stay very close in touch with the Tango 31 Aero Club is what it's called. And Kevin, his mentor. But those are important things. I'm glad you asked that question because, I think even in our darkest moments and where we're feeling a lot of pain, there is something very healing in allowing yourself to feel for others as well and be compassionate for other people. And, even though it seems like maybe you're the one who's supposed to be comforted in that moment, even turning the tables and comforting them, there was something in that tangible for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and we don't need to get into a story about this, but there would come a point in time after, a month or so where we definitely circled the wagons and our capacity shrinked for a little while. And we had to just focus on just being a family in our very small church family at that time. And that was about it. We didn't take on things outside of that, but.
Well, it sounds like Gabriel, again, in a very short time, learned how to play the guitar from YouTube.
That's right. That's right.
Got his pilot license before he got his driver's license. So, and just the impact he had on people, obviously, still lives on today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he got you out of your comfort zone. You wrote a book. So can we actually talk about that as well?
That's it. Yeah. Well, gosh, I've had you guys, I can't even talk anymore. I've had you captive for quite a while here. Can you edit that part out? Yeah. No, you don't have to. Well, I do have to go back that morning just really quickly. Otherwise it doesn't make a lot of sense. So
of course
we were contacted by NBC. She asked me, the reporter asked if I would do an interview with my wife that day. We're like, oh, heck no. We were a complete train wreck. But what ended up happening was at the end of the call, and it turned out she was a believer too, which would be very important. She said, I want you to just know this. And so if you just will think about it, and by later today, if you'll just let me know, I'll come to you, I'll walk you through it. But I'm assigned this. I have to do a report on it tonight. If I do the story without you, it's just going to be a report of his death. Mm-hmm. If you'll do it with me, I'll let you tell his story the way you want to tell it. And you can include as much as your faith as you want. And so you're going to hear some congruency there, right? With the conversation that we'd already had that morning, that we were choosing life. So it was actually my father-in-law. We had a family meeting because I didn't agree to it right then. We had a family meeting and he actually ended up saying, I think this is your first opportunity, So what happened was in that interview, somewhere in there, I said he lived his life big, bold, and brave. That wasn't a phrase we used, it wasn't a thing. And I don't even remember saying it. But what happened was, as she edited the segment, it was about a 3-minute segment, and she did a beautiful job. I have it to this day. And when we watched it that evening on the evening news, the way she chose to use it was not me physically saying it, but she signed off by saying, and Gabriel's parents encourage you to live like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave. And guys, when I heard that back to me, I knew there was life on it. Now, not a book, not a company, none of that, I just knew there was life on it. And so it became our personal mantra, kind of helped us every now and then. I like to joke. It's not like we ran around the house or had t-shirts made right away. We're, big, bold, brave all the time. It wasn't like that. But when we hit some tough spots, and maybe if we weren't living well according to the values we'd established, and we'd say, listen, can't go there. We're going to live big, bold, brave, like your brother, or I would say it to myself, whatever. And it became my tattoo. Whoops, where's it over here? This was the first expression, which is another story. I was 54, never had a tattoo. Some people don't like tattoos, whatever. But this is part of our story here. But ultimately, a couple of years later, as you guys probably have done the math already, COVID hit 3 months after he passed away. And so for us, it was all of that. Now, not to diminish what COVID did in the lives of so many people, because a lot of people suffered tremendous loss and pain. For us, what we went through dealing with COVID compared to the loss of our son, they're not even in the same stratosphere, for us. Now, lots of people lost a loved one. And so after a couple of years is when I began to just really feel strongly that there's been so much fear, so much hopelessness, just unleashed upon our world, that there's just so many people that I feel like, even though there are things that obviously don't go our way, that there is reason for hope, and there is reason for you to chase your dreams, and there is reason for you to want to love people well and have an impact on this planet and all that stuff. So that's why I wrote the book at the time that I did, because it's not just a grieving book, although it will cover some of the stuff we discussed today, but it also just some of the value systems and mindsets that we've had over the years that have just helped us to really just stay true to who we are, who we want to be, and chase our dreams, not give in to fear. And so that's ultimately why I wrote Big, Bold, Brave. The subtitle is How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. And I chose that because, you can't stop living just because there's risks out there. Mm-hmm. You got to go for it. You get one shot. That's it, And so now I've dedicated my life.
Okay, well, I will have to do a little edit.
Oh, there we go. You're back.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you froze for a sec. So you got as if you could just take it up from now I've dedicated my life, and I'll just edit that little part out.
I thought that was my cue. Oh, they gave me the hook. No, I'm kidding. No, I saw my thing. What happened was I had forgotten to completely turn off my Wi-Fi. I'm on Ethernet, so I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
Anyway, but I've just dedicated my life. That's why I've moved into the new realm of, I just want to spread this message of life, but also what I really believe, you guys, I truly believe this. If I could share this quickly, I believe three things about every human. I believe everyone was created to be courageous. And I mean, like, it's in you already. You don't have to fumble around to find it. It's already inside of you. You just need the right opportunity or someone to help you pull it out. I believe everybody was created with a creative genius, meaning that you have the ability to come up with ideas and problem solving in a unique way that nobody else can. And so there's value that only you bring to this world. And then the third one is that we were created to be compassionate. And so my goal with Big, Bold, Brave, and if you go on my website, you'll see the tagline is Courageous Humans, Inspiring Lives. If all I end up doing for the next 20, 30 years is give a bunch of speeches and people go, wow, he's really inspiring, I have completely failed, because that's not my goal. My goal is that we are very normal human beings who have been dealt some blows just like you, just like everybody else. And if we've done anything, it's just that we've chosen to keep moving forward and keep fighting to live our life. And I believe everybody has that in them. And so my goal is that people get inspired by a story so that they choose to become an inspiration, not just be inspired.
Awesome. Well, Clint, I just want to say thank you for taking the time and being so open with us and sharing so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no, I think this is an episode of this show that's definitely going to help a lot of people through some difficult times. So again, thank you for that. And thank you for honoring your son's life the way that you have as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I do appreciate it. And you guys are wonderful. And I so appreciate you taking the time to have me on. And I'm grateful.
Well, thank you. And for everyone who watched or listened to this episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast, thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.